I was just wondering about the cocoa, which is very rich in caffeine. And how do we know that the effects that you were seeing, especially with extra attentiveness, weren't due to the caffeine rather than flavonoids?
Yeah, is this on? That's a very good question. The studies I showed there were controlled for not only caffeine but also theobromine, so another stimulant which is found in the cocoa bean. But to a degree, we would of course expect theobromine and caffeine to have an effect on cognition, but that wasn't a factor in those studies that I showed you because they were controlled for that, because we were mainly interested in determining the effects of the flavonols themselves. But certainly they probably would have an effect, but the compounds are having an additional effect on top of that. That's what we would interpret from what we saw.
Thank you. And the next question was immediately behind the gentleman there.
I think I can shout.
Go for it.
And could we have the film off because it distorts the face?
Yes, of course. Yes, of course.
There's a national trial going on or survey going on at the moment, which I'm sure quite a few people here are taking part in Biobank. And I'm wondering whether you are connected into that and whether you can make use of that. And if you can't, why not? Lots of nodding.
I can speak slightly to that. We aren't directly involved in Biobank, but we are able, like any research in the UK, to access the Biobank data. So what one does is one puts an application to use particular sets of the Biobank data to analyse, at the university. My understanding at the moment is there is some quite good cognitive data, there's some reasonable nutrition data, and I don't think there's any imaging data in.
There is, but it's not available.
It's not available. Okay.
Yet. Yeah.
Okay. So it kind of helps us probably to answer some of the questions we need to answer, but in honesty, certainly from what we presented this evening, not really the sort of detail. It doesn't give us the detailed data that we would need to answer some of the questions about mechanisms of action and also some of the long-term effects of some of the aspects of diet and brain training and exercise that we would also look at. But it certainly is a very, very useful data set, and it is being used by researchers across the UK and actually internationally as well.
Yes, gentleman at the back.
One of the factors which I'm sure you will all agree about in the Mediterranean lifestyle is the enormous difference in the amount of sunshine that they have.
Yeah. And outdoor.
Please do, yeah.
Anyone have comments on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, things like, sunlight exposure has been largely portrayed as a negative thing to a degree for a long time in this country, but we now understand that, through vitamin D synthesis, and now linking vitamin D status to diseases like dementia, like particularly cancer. There's certainly a lot to be said for getting out in the sun and as well as moving around more in the outdoors environment. I mean, it's all going to be very positive. So that's certainly a factor which can't be overlooked.
Yes.
What do you think of food supplements? You can't get them by the day, or 6 or 7 or 8 or how many. Can you substitute supplements? I'm not a classic nutritionist, so I come from the view that yes, as long as those supplements are containing what they say they contain, and one of the problems is at the moment with the industry is that it's not very well regulated. So, what I mean by that is you can make an extract of something and you can say it contains what was in the original food, but whether or not it does is not very well understood. There's not a lot of monitoring of that. There's not a lot of standardization. The purification process is very complex, turning something into a supplement. Okay, so for example, if you wanted to use epicatechin, which is one of these compounds which we think is particularly active, you need to get that from somewhere and you need to extract it and purify it. And by the time you get to the end, then you're going to end up with something probably quite unexpected. I mean, for example, I mentioned the processing of tea and the processing of cocoa leads to great reductions.
So I think the general viewpoint at the moment would be we try to achieve it through diet. I mean, the other worry, of course, is, I mean, if you go into shops like Holland and Barrett, you can see supplements of some of these compounds at 1 gram levels, which, you know, I would say is bordering on the toxic. I mean, certainly you can have too much of these things, and through diet you can't overconsume them. So I think in time, when we know more about it and we're better at extracting them, it will be a very good way of delivering these compounds. But at the moment, due to the lack of regulation and standardisation, it's just not a very good way at all.
Okay. I'm just going to take the privilege of asking a question myself now, because there was something that was troubling me. Professor Kawashima, you recommended that one thing we should do is go home and read the newspaper out loud.
Yeah.
What's the difference between reading out loud and just reading in your head? Is there a significant difference there? In terms of effectiveness?
My comment is depends on the functional MRI study. And we measure the brain activation using the functional MRI, and we found that the speaking aloud shows a lot of brain activity compared with just silently reading. And so that's why we recommend it. Also, from the cognitive scientific point of view, says reading the sentences aloud requires a lot of cognitive function, because not only for the watching the sentences, but also it should convert to the sounds and move your mouths, and also should hear your voices from your ears. So it requires a lot of cognitive function.
So it's like a multitask thing, is it really?
Yeah. No.
Okay, I suppose the risk is that you annoy everybody around you. That's a potential disadvantage. Thank you very much. Now, another question. Yes.
A cycling question. Apart from the exercise, cycling is also exciting. Bombing downhill, negotiating traffic, all gives you a bit of an adrenaline rush. Is this good for the brain or deleterious?
Well, I think too much anxiety will be, and too much stress would ultimately lead to some negative effects there as well. What we noticed in our trial, and what people also reported to us, is really where they enjoyed cycling most was following the Thames and the Thames path, and they cycled mostly off roads as much as they could, and that's also what a lot of places in the UK are trying to do, is to create more and more cycle paths that are isolated from the road and from the traffic that we have here, and that seems to be better, I would say.
I suppose it's variable depending on how much you enjoy that in a way. Some people like roller coasters and other people.
It has a rejuvenating effect.
Yeah.
You feel like bombing down the hill, you know. That's one of the few excitements for old people.
Then I would say go for it. Yeah.
Good. Yes.
Sorry, I was going to say, just one follow-up to that question. I think you might have passed me this morning, by the way, on your bicycle. Someone whizzed past me very quickly. But I think that does actually link as well to this notion of novelty and challenge as well, which I think Professor Kawashima kind of relates to the brain training sort of area as well, doesn't it? Because it is all about that sort of that constantly looking for sort of curiosity, new opportunities, new ways of sort of working and thinking.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Hi. Has anyone looked at historical lifestyle of dementia sufferers to see if you could look at how they lived their lives before they got dementia? I realise some of them maybe I don't tell you that, but certainly the children could. Another point, my own personal experience. My father had a very fit, active life all his life. He was playing tennis in the 90s. His short-term memory was absolutely rubbish. He could tell you exactly what went on during the wars, to the extent of boring family and friends to pieces. And another one of the exercise, I agree, it's very good for you, but there are various definite advances. How can you explain Professor Hawkins? Potentially the most potent brain on the planet can't exercise at all. So I think some of these things are a little bit difficult. Variances in people in general. People are obviously very intelligent, not. And I don't think there's any way that can be taken into account. And I think that must make the job very, very difficult.
I think sort of one response is, and you're absolutely right, and I think everything we presented is about the reduction of relative risk, so it's a statistical analysis that we're presenting which kind of talks about your risk relative to some of the population, but it's not telling you whether you're individually going to develop dementia or not, because that is, as we sort of mentioned earlier on, it is determined by a whole range of different individual factors. So this is about relative reduction of risk. Hopefully, if you adhere to some of the activities we talked about this evening, it will help you, hopefully, to stave off cognitive decline. But we can't make any 100% promises that it will, because there are lots of other factors that are involved, lots of individual differences, as you've mentioned, that are involved in the likelihood of ultimately developing cognitive decline or one of the dementias.
Good. Yes. Can you, let's have a mic here.
Dried or frozen blueberries and other fruits be as effective as fresh?
Yes, very much so. I mean, and also a much cheaper alternative to buying fresh, and can be stored for a long time. I mean, one thing that I would certainly recommend is mixed frozen berries. I mean, again, you can usually tell the quality by, or the degree of ripeness and the amount of compounds that they contain by the colour of them. This certainly is the case that in some situations, if you go out and pick your own blackberries, you can certainly select the brightest coloured ones, probably the ones with the highest concentrations. But to an extent, I mean, frozen ones are as good as. I mean, there's no difference chemically within them. Degree of ripeness is a factor, of course. So as the ripeness increases, these compounds become richer within there. It's also the case that sometimes storing them at home in the fridge can continue to develop some of these compounds. Their concentration can increase. So yeah, I mean, I think the general thing that we've been trying to say is try to do something, and you don't want to rule it out because you're finding it too expensive to buy fresh blueberries every week, which can be £3 or £4 per punnet. So yeah, I mean, frozen is as good. Dried, yeah, dry. I mean, dried fruits are now part of their 5 a day as well. So it's obviously a reduced amount because you've lost the water, so you don't need to consume as much. I think it's 30 or 40 grams of dried fruits is equivalent to the 80 grams of the fresh.
We've got time for just a couple more questions, and I think the first one is at the back there.
Just wondering if it makes sense to have your fruit and vegetable smoothie versus
I don't think it really matters. I mean, what you can do with a smoothie, of course, is you can combine. So you can throw lots of different fruits and vegetables into a smoothie and consume. Certainly, a smoothie is better than a juice because it's still got the fibre and the cellular matrices, which also are good for our guts, for instance. So in terms of juice compared to smoothies, juice is probably limited to one portion a day of about 150 mils, whereas with something like a smoothie, which contains the whole fruit and the whole vegetable, usually, I think you're fine combining, and it will be as good as eating it fresh.
I think gentleman here was going to have the last question.
You say that cocoa deteriorates and it's go through the process. Where does drinking chocolate sit in that? A lot of it seems to be drinking chocolate, they all have cocoa.
Well, I mean, drinking chocolate obviously contains a lot more sugar, and it's got usually the milk proteins in there as well. So it's a lower concentration of those compounds for sure. But one misconception is that the darker the chocolate, the better it is. And actually, these compounds are colourless, and it's only when you oxidize them and destroy them they become black, insoluble polymers. So it's not. That's why I said it's not always the case that you're going to have the higher amount in a cocoa than a drinking chocolate or a dark chocolate to a milk. It's a little bit of a confusion at the moment, and that's actually why we're trying to get a recommended daily intake for some of these compounds, like vitamins, where you will have this printed then on the backs of packets, so people will know, and it will be legally binding to report that.
Thank you. I'd said I was last, but I am going to ask one more question because I find this such a fascinating topic, trying to sort out my own personal lifestyle. And it's slightly off the subject in a way, but it's something I often see in the news and hear about, which is what's the importance of sleep for cognitive function and aging? Is it good to have a lot of sleep and not much sleep, or does it make any difference? What is the truth about sleep? Can anybody... I don't know whether Professor Kawashima knows about sleep, because you've been telling us about sort of exciting our brain and doing things, but
we actually
sleep? Is sleep?
we actually have data for the children's development, and we found that the longer the sleep, then larger the hippocampus. So which means that it's good for the brain development. So same is, I guess the same is true for the adults. So I guess the longer sleep is better for the brain health.
Okay, all right. Any other comments on that? I mean, that sounds persuasive to me.
I mean, well, there is some evidence to suggest that, you know, when you sleep, there's a lot of repair or replenishing of neuronal activity occurring. So, I mean, I guess the longer the period, I don't know whether there's a limit to that, whether there's an optimum, probably, like everything.
Yeah, it's an optimum, but certainly not to be under it. I think that research has shown.
Okay.
Like if you are a person who needs 7-8 hours, then take it. And don't try to cut it down to 6 because you're busy.
Well, look, we must wind this to a close because we're almost out of time. So it gives me the pleasure of thanking our speakers, especially Professor Ryuta Kawashima from Tohoku University, who's been with us for a couple of days, running some seminars and workshops in our School of Psychology. I have heard there's been absolutely fantastic events, so a huge thank you for visiting the university. And we are really excited about having a collaboration with your laboratory. I also really want to thank Professor Jeremy Spencer, Dr. Carien van Reekum and Professor Laurie Butler for their wonderful presentations. And I think they've shown you how the research that we do in the School of Psychology is not only cutting edge in an academic sense, but relevant to everybody's lives. And also, our academics are brilliant communicators at the research they're doing. So I'd like to finish off by a fabulous round of applause for our school. If you are cycling home, go very carefully down the hills. When you get home, have a glass of blueberry smoothie or red wine.
Yeah.
Do a bit of reading out loud. Annoy your partner. But most of all, enjoy yourself, because I think that was a message as well. Do what you enjoy. Thank you so much for coming, and I do hope we see you again at the University of Reading event. Thank you.